You come to my house at midnight, after your brother left me standing at the altar, and you're telling me he didn't leave because he stopped loving me?
No, he loves you.
Then why did he leave?
Because someone was watching you.
What?
Your apartment, your mother's house, your office. Cameron knew they were following you.
Then why didn't he tell me?
Because he was afraid they'd hurt you.
He humiliated me in front of everyone I love, Grant. He let me walk down that aisle alone. He couldn't even give me the truth.
Because the truth would have put a target on your back.
The bride was standing at the altar when she realized the man she was supposed to marry had already left the building. His phone was switched off. His car was gone. And in the pocket of the wedding dress she had spent 11 months choosing, there was a folded note from him containing only 7 words. I'm sorry. You were never the problem. Her name was Lena Hartwell, and for the first time in her life, she understood what it felt like to be abandoned in front of everyone who had ever mattered to her. But that humiliation was only the beginning. Because less than 24 hours after her fiancé disappeared, the most powerful man in his family came to her door with an offer that sounded impossible. He was her fiancé's billionaire older brother, and he asked Lena to marry him. Before we continue, tell us the city you're watching from. We love seeing where our stories are reaching around the world, and if emotional stories filled with love, betrayal, unexpected twists, and unforgettable endings are your kind of escape, hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. Now, let's see how this story unfolds. To understand why Lena Hartwell was left standing alone at an altar, you have to understand what she believed she was walking toward that morning. She was 29 years old, the daughter of 2 school teachers, and the kind of woman who had spent most of her life believing that love was something you built, rather than something you found. Lena worked as a senior architectural designer at a respected Chicago firm, lived modestly, saved carefully, and had never cared much about luxury. Her wedding to Cameron Ashford was supposed to be the one moment when all the sacrifices she had made finally felt worthwhile. Cameron was charming, affectionate, ambitious, and, according to everyone who knew him, completely devoted to her. They had been together for 3 years. He had proposed beneath a string of lights in the courtyard of the restaurant where they had celebrated their first anniversary. Lena had cried when she said yes. She believed she had just agreed to spend the rest of her life with the right man. Cameron came from a family whose name carried considerably more weight than Lena's. The Ashfords owned a private investment empire worth billions, although Cameron had always insisted that he wanted to build something of his own. His parents had accepted Lena politely, but there had always been a quiet distance between them. Cameron's mother, Celeste, often corrected Lena's table manners without admitting that she was correcting them. His father, Malcolm, asked questions about Lena's career that somehow always sounded like questions about her financial value. But Cameron defended her every time. At least, that was what Lena believed. There was one member of the Ashford family she rarely saw. Cameron's older brother, Grant Ashford, had spent years living between New York, London, and Singapore, building the family's investment division into an international empire. Newspapers called him one of America's youngest self-made billionaires, even though his first fortune had come through the Ashford family business. To Lena, he was simply Cameron's intimidating older brother, the man who never smiled for photographs and seemed to know more than he ever said. On the morning of the wedding, Lena woke before sunrise in a suite overlooking Lake Michigan. Her bridesmaids were asleep in the adjoining room, exhausted from the rehearsal dinner and the endless preparations. She sat alone beside the window, holding the small velvet box Cameron had given her on their second anniversary. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet engraved with the date they met. She ran her thumb across the engraving and smiled. She had no idea that within hours she would be wondering whether the 3 years she had spent loving Cameron had ever been real. At 7:42 that morning, Cameron received a message. Lena would later learn that this was the moment everything changed. He read the message while sitting in the hotel lobby, stared at the screen for nearly a minute, and then walked outside. He never came back. At first, nobody was worried. The wedding party assumed Cameron had gone to deal with an emergency. His best man said Cameron had probably needed privacy. The coordinator said the groom was likely calming his nerves. But then 10 minutes became 30. 30 became an hour. The makeup artist kept glancing at Lena through the mirror. Her mother, Diane Hartwell, began making phone calls. Cameron's closest friend stopped answering questions, and then, 20 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Cameron's best man received a message that made his face lose all color. Cameron had left the hotel. He had taken his car. He had told no one where he was going. Lena still refused to believe he had abandoned her. She kept saying there had to be an explanation. She kept repeating that Cameron loved her. That sentence became her shield because the alternative was too painful to consider. The ceremony began anyway. That was the cruelest part. The guests were already seated. The flowers were arranged, the musicians were ready. Lena walked toward the altar beneath hundreds of eyes, holding a bouquet of white garden roses. Every step felt heavier than the one before it. She reached the altar and looked at the empty space beside the minister. There was no Cameron, no explanation, no apology, just an empty place where her future was supposed to be. At first, people remained silent. Then whispers moved through the room. Someone near the back started crying. One of Cameron's relatives stood up and left. Lena's mother rushed toward her, but Lena stopped her. She stood completely still for several seconds, staring at the empty altar. Then she noticed something tucked beneath the flowers on the groom's side. It was a small cream-colored envelope with her name written on it. Inside was Cameron's note. 7 words. "I'm sorry. You were never the problem." Lena read it twice. Then a third time, her hands began shaking. She did not scream. She did not collapse. She simply folded the paper, placed it inside her wedding bouquet, and walked away from the altar. For the next 6 hours, she would hear hundreds of opinions about what had happened. Some people said Cameron had panicked. Others suggested he had found another woman. A few quietly wondered whether Lena had done something to drive him away. By evening, photographs of her leaving the church had already begun appearing online. The woman abandoned at her wedding became a story before she even had time to understand what had happened to her. But the internet did not know what Lena knew. Cameron had not simply disappeared. Someone had made sure he disappeared. That night, Lena returned to the apartment she and Cameron had planned to move into after the wedding. She removed her wedding dress and sat on the floor in silence. There were unopened gifts stacked against the wall. A framed photograph of them stood on the kitchen counter. Their honeymoon tickets were still inside a drawer. Everything looked normal, which somehow made the pain worse. At 11:37 that night, someone knocked on the door. Lena assumed it was her mother. It wasn't. When she opened the door, she found Grant Ashford standing in the hallway. He was wearing a dark overcoat, his expression unreadable, his usually controlled face carrying something Lena had never seen before: fear. He looked at her for several seconds before saying the words that would change both their lives. "Lena, Cameron didn't leave you because he stopped loving you." She stared at him. Grant stepped inside and placed a black folder on the table. He told her he had spent the entire day trying to find his brother. He had finally located Cameron 2 states away, staying under a false name. But Cameron had refused to return. Lena asked the obvious question: why? Grant opened the folder. Inside were bank transfers, photographs, copies of legal documents, and messages Lena had never seen. He told her that for months, someone had been moving money from accounts connected to the Ashford family business. The transfers were hidden beneath legitimate transactions, but whoever was responsible had been careful, too careful. Cameron had discovered something 3 days before the wedding, something involving a person inside the family. Grant said Cameron believed marrying Lena would put her in danger. Lena looked at him and asked why Cameron couldn't have simply told her. Grant had no answer that satisfied her. The next morning, Lena learned that Cameron had sent Grant one final message before disappearing. It contained only a location and a sentence: "If she stays close to me, they will use her." Grant believed Cameron had been trying to protect her. Lena wasn't convinced. She was furious. Protection without truth had still left her humiliated in front of hundreds of people. She told Grant that whatever danger existed, she wanted nothing to do with the Ashfords. She wanted her life back. She wanted Cameron to explain himself. Most of all, she wanted the man she had loved for 3 years to look her in the eyes and tell her why he had chosen to destroy her on the most important day of her life. Grant listened without interrupting. Then he made an offer that Lena initially thought was an insult. He asked her to marry him. For several seconds, Lena simply stared at him. Grant explained that the Ashford family had been under investigation for months because of the missing money. Whoever was manipulating the accounts believed Cameron had found evidence. If Lena remained connected to Cameron, she could become a target. But if she became Grant's wife, she would receive legal protection through the Ashford family's security structure and, more importantly, access to information that could help expose whoever was responsible. Lena laughed because the alternative was crying. She told Grant he had lost his mind. He agreed that the proposal sounded insane, but he said he wasn't asking because he was attracted to her or because he wanted revenge against Cameron. He was asking because there was one thing he knew with certainty. "You are already inside this," he told her. "The only question is whether you face it alone." Lena refused him. For the next 2 weeks, she disappeared from the public eye. She stopped answering reporters. She took unpaid leave from work. She stayed with her mother and tried to rebuild some sense of normality, but the humiliation followed her everywhere. Women she barely knew sent messages telling her they were sorry. Strangers online debated whether she had been good enough for Cameron. Someone even created a social media account dedicated to the wedding disaster. Lena learned that heartbreak could be public, and public heartbreak had a way of making private pain feel permanent. Then one afternoon, a package arrived at her mother's house. Inside was Lena's engagement ring. Cameron had returned it. There was no note, just the ring. Beneath it was a flash drive. Lena almost threw it away. Instead, she took it to Grant. The flash drive contained security footage from the hotel on the morning of the wedding. Lena watched Cameron receive the mysterious message. She watched him leave the lobby, but then she saw something else. At 8:12 that morning, Cameron met a man in a parking garage. The man's face was partially hidden, but Lena recognized the coat. It belonged to Malcolm Ashford, Cameron and Grant's father. Cameron appeared frightened. Malcolm handed him a document. Cameron read it, then grabbed his father's arm. The footage ended before they could be heard. Grant watched the screen without moving. Lena looked at him and realized something important. Grant had suspected his father for months, but he had never had proof. The next clue came from Cameron himself. 3 days later, Lena received an email from an unknown address. The message contained only a sentence. "If Grant asks you to marry him again, say yes." Lena immediately called Grant. He arrived within 20 minutes. He read the message twice. Then he told Lena something he had never told anyone outside the family. Cameron had not been running from Lena. He had been running from their father. Malcolm had discovered that Cameron was preparing to expose a financial scheme involving one of the Ashford family's largest investment divisions. The scheme had been operating for years. Millions had been redirected through shell companies. Cameron had found the evidence because he had been auditing the division himself. But there was one problem. The evidence was stored inside a private trust, controlled by a person Malcolm trusted completely, Grant. Lena's expression changed. For the first time, she wondered whether Grant was telling her the truth. That night, Lena confronted him. She asked whether he had known about the money. Grant said no. She asked whether Cameron had accused him. Grant said Cameron had suspected everyone. Lena asked the question that mattered most. "Why do you really want me to marry you?" Grant remained silent for several seconds. Then he admitted that there was another reason. Years earlier, before Lena ever met Cameron, Grant had seen her once. It was at a charity event where she had been presenting architectural designs for affordable housing. Grant had remembered her because she was the only person in the room who openly challenged an investor about exploiting low-income neighborhoods. He had never approached her. He said he respected the fact that she didn't know who he was. When Cameron introduced them years later, Grant realized she was the same woman. Lena was stunned. Grant admitted that he had admired her long before she became his brother's fiancé, but he had never acted on it. He had buried those feelings because Cameron loved her, and because he believed some lines should never be crossed. His proposal wasn't purely strategic. There was love in it. Quiet love, the kind he had spent years refusing to name. Lena didn't know whether that confession comforted her or frightened her. She had just been abandoned by one Ashford brother. Now the other was telling her he had loved her from a distance. The irony was almost unbearable. Meanwhile, Cameron was still missing. 3 weeks after the wedding, Lena received another message. This time it contained an address in Wisconsin. Grant wanted to go with her, but Lena refused. She said she needed to hear Cameron's explanation without anyone else in the room. Grant reluctantly agreed. Lena drove through the night. She arrived at a small lakeside cabin shortly after sunrise. Cameron opened the door. He looked exhausted. He had lost weight. His beard had grown out. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. Lena stood there wearing the same bracelet he had given her years earlier. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Cameron began to cry. He told Lena that he had planned to marry her. He had planned their vows. He had even written a letter to read to her before the ceremony. But that morning, Malcolm had shown him photographs of Lena leaving work, Lena's mother entering her house, and Lena sitting alone in a coffee shop. Cameron realized someone had been following her. Malcolm told him that if Cameron married Lena, the people investigating the financial scheme would use her to force him to surrender the evidence. Cameron panicked. Instead of trusting Lena, he decided to disappear. He thought he was saving her. But he admitted the truth. He was also afraid. Afraid of his father. Afraid of losing his family. Afraid that the life he had built with Lena would become a weapon against him. Lena listened quietly. Then she asked him why he hadn't told her. Cameron said, because he believed he was strong enough to handle it alone. Lena told him that wasn't strength. It was cowardice, disguised as protection. Cameron lowered his head. He apologized. But Lena knew something had changed. The man she had loved was still sitting in front of her, but the future she had imagined with him was gone. She asked whether he still loved her. Cameron said yes. Then she asked whether he believed he deserved another chance. He couldn't answer. That silence gave her the answer she needed. Before Lena left, Cameron handed her a second flash drive. He told her it contained everything he had discovered. He said Grant was the only person he trusted to expose their father. But there was one thing Cameron begged her to understand. Grant wasn't manipulating her. He had genuinely tried to protect both of them. Lena returned to Chicago with the evidence. This time, she didn't go to the police. She went to a federal financial crimes attorney Grant had been working with. Within 48 hours, investigators began examining the Ashford accounts. Malcolm disappeared from public view. Then came the revelation that changed everything. The financial scheme had not been created by Malcolm. It had been created by Cameron. The evidence appeared undeniable. Money had moved through companies connected directly to Cameron. Documents carried his digital signature. Several accounts had been opened using his authorization. Grant looked at Lena and said he had been wrong about his brother. Cameron had not simply discovered the scheme. He had been involved in it. Lena refused to believe it until investigators confirmed that the evidence was authentic. Suddenly, the story became darker. Cameron had not abandoned Lena to protect her. He may have abandoned her because his entire life was collapsing. Grant confronted Cameron. Cameron admitted that he had initially helped Malcolm move money because he believed it was part of a legitimate tax strategy. When he discovered the truth, he tried to withdraw. Malcolm threatened him. Cameron then began secretly collecting evidence to expose the operation. But he had already become legally involved. If the truth came out, Cameron could be prosecuted alongside his father. That was why he ran. That was why he left Lena. And that was why he begged Grant to protect her. He had been guilty, but he had also been trying to undo the damage. For Lena, the truth was devastating. She realized that the man she had planned to marry had never been entirely innocent. But she also realized that Grant had known more than he had told her. She confronted him again. Grant admitted that he had discovered Cameron's involvement months earlier. He had kept investigating because he believed Cameron was trying to expose the operation, but he had withheld the truth from Lena because he feared she would leave before they could bring the entire scheme down. Lena told him that secrecy was exactly what had destroyed her relationship with Cameron. She could not build a life with another man who believed protecting her meant deciding what she deserved to know. Grant didn't argue. He simply handed her a set of documents and walked away. The documents contained his own resignation from the Ashford company. He had transferred control of his investment division into an independent trust and agreed to cooperate fully with federal investigators. He had also arranged for Lena to receive the apartment she and Cameron had planned to share, debt-free, without conditions. Lena asked why. Grant told her he didn't want her to owe him anything. Not money, not loyalty, not love. He had proposed marriage because he loved her, but he finally understood that love without freedom was another form of control. That was the moment Lena's feelings for Grant changed. Not because he was a billionaire. Not because he had protected her. Not because he was Cameron's brother. But because, for the first time since the wedding, a man was giving her the freedom to walk away. Months passed. The investigation became national news. Malcolm Ashford was indicted on multiple financial charges. Cameron accepted a plea agreement and agreed to testify against his father. His cooperation reduced his sentence, but it did not erase what he had done. Lena never returned to him. She visited him once before his sentencing. Cameron apologized again. This time, Lena believed him. But forgiveness did not mean reconciliation. She told him she would always care about the person he had been before everything fell apart, but she could no longer build a future around someone who had taught her that love could disappear without warning. Cameron nodded. Then he told her something she never expected. He said Grant had been right about one thing. Lena deserved someone who would stay when things became difficult. Someone who would tell her the truth even when the truth was ugly. Someone who would never make her choose between love and dignity. Lena left the prison that afternoon knowing exactly who he meant. But she did not call Grant, not yet. For the next year, Lena rebuilt her life. She returned to architecture. She launched a nonprofit focused on affordable housing for women, rebuilding their lives after financial hardship. She stopped reading comments about her wedding. She stopped explaining what happened. And slowly the woman who had once been defined by the image of a bride abandoned at an altar became known for something else. She became known for the buildings she designed, the communities she helped, and the courage she showed when her entire future collapsed. Grant stayed away. He never pressured her. Never sent flowers. Never appeared unexpectedly. He simply lived his life, separated from the Ashford empire, and working on rebuilding the company without his father. Lena occasionally saw his name in newspapers. She noticed that he had donated millions to housing programs, but never attached his name to them. She wondered whether he had done it because of her. She eventually realized he had done it because he had finally learned that wealth meant little if it couldn't improve someone's life. One evening, almost 2 years after the wedding that never happened, Lena was standing inside the first completed building of her nonprofit. It was a 6-story apartment complex designed for single mothers and women starting over. There were children playing in the courtyard. Lights glowed warmly through the windows. Lena stood near the entrance, watching families move into homes they could finally afford. Then she saw Grant. He wasn't carrying flowers. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit. He was standing near the entrance holding a small cardboard box. Lena walked toward him. Grant smiled and handed her the box. Inside was the gold bracelet she had left behind at the cabin the night she confronted Cameron. Grant had kept it for almost 2 years. Lena looked up and asked why he was returning it now. Grant said because it belonged to her, and because he had finally learned that love should never be held hostage by timing, guilt, or obligation. Lena smiled through tears. Then Grant said something that she would remember for the rest of her life. "I don't want you to marry me because you were hurt. I don't want you to marry me because I rescued you, and I don't want you to marry me because Cameron failed you. If you ever choose me, I want it to be because when you look at me, you see a future you actually want." Lena looked around the building she had created. She thought about the woman she had been at the altar. She thought about Cameron, the man who had once been her entire future. She thought about Grant, the man who had entered her life as a stranger, became the brother of the man who broke her heart, and eventually became the person who taught her that love could be patient. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out the wedding ring Cameron had returned months earlier. She placed it in Grant's hand. Then she said that she didn't want the old ring. She wanted a new beginning. 6 months later, Lena and Grant were married in a small garden ceremony with fewer than 50 guests. There was no luxury ballroom, no press, no grand Ashford spectacle. Lena wore a simple ivory dress. Grant stood beside her with tears in his eyes. And this time, when the bride reached the altar, the man waiting for her was there. But the most important part of Lena's story wasn't that she eventually married a billionaire. It was that she learned she didn't need a billionaire, a fiancé, or anyone else to prove that her life had value. The woman who once stood alone at an empty altar had believed her future had ended that morning. She was wrong. Her old future had ended. Her life had not. Years later, Lena would tell people that the wedding she never had became the greatest turning point of her life. The humiliation she thought would define her became the beginning of her independence. The man who abandoned her became a lesson in the difference between love and fear. And the man who asked her to marry him when she was at her lowest eventually became the man who loved her enough to let her choose him freely. There was one final detail that Lena kept private for many years. The morning after her wedding to Grant, she found an envelope waiting on the table beside their breakfast. It was from Cameron. He had completed his sentence and was beginning a new life outside the Ashford empire. Inside the envelope was a single photograph from the day Lena and Cameron had first met. They were standing outside a coffee shop, laughing at something neither of them could remember anymore. On the back, Cameron had written one sentence: "I hope the woman you became is happier than the woman I failed." Lena read it once, then she placed the photograph inside a drawer. She didn't burn it. She didn't keep it beside her bed. She simply let it become what it was supposed to be, a piece of her past. Because some people enter your life to stay. Others enter your life to teach you what you should never accept again. And sometimes, the person you think has destroyed your future is only clearing the path toward the life you were always meant to have. Lena Hartwell had walked down an aisle, believing she was about to become someone's wife. She walked away, believing she had become someone's humiliation. But years later, she understood the truth. She had never been abandoned at the altar. She had been released from the wrong future. And when the right man finally stood beside her, he didn't ask her to forget what happened. He simply gave her enough time, enough honesty, and enough freedom to choose love again. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from, and tell us this: would you have forgiven Cameron, or would you have chosen Grant? And if stories about love, betrayal, second chances, and unexpected endings are your kind of escape, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next story.